son wanted to be the security guy. He claimed he was a security guy.
Welcome to another what, Brian? I don't have a word today, Brian. Help me out. What should I say?
Another groovy.
Okay, another groovy version of Security Guy Radio with your host, Chuck Harold, and Paul, I'm sorry to say, Paul No Show Bristow. Poor Paul is under the weather today, Brian. So you're going to help me out and co-host me a little bit?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay, good. Well, today, Brian, we're going to be talking about, as we often do, a domestic violence issue. But we have a new angle on this today because I have a really cool guest, a friend of mine from Chicago, Pam Paziotopoulos. And Pam is Senior Vice President of Forest Advisors out of Chicago. And she's going to talk to us today about how to get out of these relationships. So you've heard all the stories with my stalker victims and domestic violence victims.
Previous guest, yeah.
Yeah, but we haven't really had a discussion on what do you do now. We heard the horror stories, but I think you'll find this interesting today that Pam's going to tell us how to get out of this because she has a lot of experience in that. And instead of me tripping on my words and mispronouncing things like I always do in my introductions, I'm going to let Pam introduce herself. So welcome, Pam.
Oh, thank you, Chuck. It's a pleasure to be here
Thanks
today.
for coming all the way out from Chicago. That's great.
My favorite radio show.
Oh, thank you very much. But have you liked me on Facebook?
I believe I have.
And followed me on
Probably
Twitter.
several times.
And follow me on Twitter and YouTube. Don't forget, everybody, securityguyradio.com. And follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube, especially because we put all these videos on YouTube. So, Pam, tell the audience about your background because it's really kind of fascinating to me. You have a really, really specific background in this area, and I think it's going to be very interesting to have people listen to you today. So tell us where you came from.
Okay. Well, I started in the state's attorney's office in Chicago, which, as you know, is one of the largest state's attorney's offices in the country, 900 lawyers. I started there in 1990, and I was a prosecutor in a variety of courtrooms, spent some time in, they had these domestic violence courtrooms, but it wasn't like a specific division. I stayed there until 1995. Then I left and I worked for the American Prosecutors Research Institute in Washington, D.C., where I traveled in a year to 38 states, lots of rural places, Indian reservations, looking at domestic violence programs, talking to cops, prosecutors, victim advocates, really learning a lot during that year. Then I came back to the state's attorney's office in 1997 and started a formalized domestic violence division and ran that division for a while. And I've been in private practice now for about 10 years.
So you work for Forest Advisors now, and that's forestadvisors.com?
Correct.
Out of Chicago, okay. And what we're going to talk about today is a new program you've come up with. And you call it PAM, which is the acronym for partnerandmentor.com, partnerandmentor.com. And tell us exactly what that is. What does that do to help the domestic violence and or abusive spouse victim?
Basically, it's to help people navigate through unhealthy relationships. And as you know, you were a former law enforcement. Unfortunately, when I was in court, you would be dealing with the aftermath, right? Somebody's already hurt. Somebody's been stalked. Somebody's been murdered. What can you do on the preventative end? Everybody knows that these people know that they're in unhealthy relationships. They just don't know how to get out.
Okay, so let's be specific because our previous guests have talked about what to do when you're before you decide to leave. This is when a lot of the violence happens. But you're talking about after you've kind of made your mind up that you have to get out. You're helping people with the get out part. In other words, when they get to court, when you and I saw them, it's too late. Something bad happened. They got hurt. They got killed.
Right. Then it's up to the prosecutors to hopefully do what they need to do to keep you safe.
Right. So your program, the Partner and Mentor, is to make them engage in a smooth transition, so to speak, navigate through all the legal things. Why is this different? I mean, can't we just go down to the DA's office and say, hey, my husband hit me in the nose and you got to do something about it?
Well, and we handle cases on a variety of cases, even cases where there is no physical abuse, so there's not going to be any crimes charged, there's not going to be any protective orders.
Makes sense.
Some people are just in very unhealthy, emotionally abusive relationships with people that have narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder. You sit down with them, you start going through the characteristics, and they're like, oh my God, yes, this is exactly the person I'm talking about. They need validation almost that, they're in an unhealthy relationship. As far as some of the folks that are being stalked, I cannot tell you, Chuck, how many times I've met someone at a Starbucks and they have paperwork about 5 inches high and they can't get a police officer to talk to them. Okay, they're being stalked by their ex. No one's listening to them.
So this is post-divorce or maybe during the divorce process?
It could be divorce. It could just be people that, break up. Somebody moves out of the house. They don't know where you live anymore, but they know where you work, right? So they start following you at work, showing up at work. Unfortunately, you go down to the police station. You're like, hey, I just saw his car outside my house. Okay, did he threaten you? No. How many times has it happened? Well, this is the first time. So what do? You're a former police officer. What do?
They don't do anything usually.
Not
Cops,
much.
Not much.
You're lucky if you get a police report, but what does that get you?
Let me back
right?
up for 1 second. We talked about this before the show. You're targeting a specific audience in your service, right? And you said the professional, and I was kind of fascinated by this. These people that are, let's say, professional, they're doctors, lawyers, or some high-end business professional. They tend not to report these things. They tend not to want to go public with it. They tend not to want to go to court with it. Is that true?
Oh, when I was
and why is that true, by the way?
Well, when I was a prosecutor, obviously there were domestic violence crimes that occurred out of a variety of neighborhoods in Chicago, including the Gold Coast, right off the Mag Mile. But do you think those victims showed up for court? No. Why not? Because it's just not part of their culture. They can't possibly imagine. I mean, they called 911 because they were afraid. There was abuse going on. They needed it to stop. But 3 weeks later, right, when the honeymoon phase kicks in and the offender's saying they're sorry, they're not going to show up for court. Because do they really want the offender to go to jail? No. They usually just want the behavior to stop.
And why don't they want them to go to jail? Economics? What is it?
Could be a variety of things, I mean, these relationships are often unhealthy, somewhat toxic sometimes, A lot of times I can't tell you how many people have said, well, Miss Prosecutor, I haven't worked for 20 years. If you throw him in jail or he gets a conviction and loses his job, are you going to put food on the table for us?
That's a good point. I'm looking at some statistic here off your website. Because if this relates to work and my career, and I'm a female or a male in a good career and it pays things, and I'm the abuser or the victim, and I lose my job, the whole marriage and the financial institution, the kids, everything falls apart. And I was interesting to see that 74% of abusers will abuse their victims at work, either in person or over the telephone. 58% of the victims will be late for work 5 times a month. So if you're a victim of this and you're a lawyer and your husband's crazy and he's stalking you, you can't be late 5 times, for work for anybody, especially if you got to be in court or something. 20% of the victims leave early at least 5 times a month, and 54% of the victims miss at least 3 full days of work a month. That's terminable.
And look at the lost productivity that in that particular employee. Businesses say they don't want to get involved. How can they not get involved? This is definitely a business issue.
Well, and also said that 92% of those who are physically abused by their partners do not discuss the incidents with their physicians. That I couldn't believe that.
Yeah, and you know what? Across the board, there's so much training going on to ER docs now because people will come in with a black eye. How did this happen? Oh, I fell down the stairs. Well, if you're investigating a case and the person says they fell down the stairs, they're not just going to have a black eye. They're going to have other injuries. So we encourage the doctors to write in the notes, injuries inconsistent with what patient is saying.
So if I'm your client, you're going to help me navigate through all this. You're going to help me get through the system, get out in a way that
get to the system sometimes, Chuck.
Well, that's a good
How
point.
many times I meet these people at Starbucks, no one's paying attention to them. I start making some phone calls as a former prosecutor, as a former supervisor of the domestic violence division, and I say, I don't know why you're sitting on this case. I think this is a really high risk to this particular victim. And, we really put things in motion for people.
So if they're being stalked, do you recommend restraining orders? I've had different experiences with them.
Sure, everybody has. Some people say it's just a piece of paper. I do think they are effective, and it's a great first step for a lot of people, especially if the abuser's employed. All of a sudden somebody shows up at their office, they're a doctor, they're a lawyer, they're this, they're that, with a restraining order. They're like, whoa. They actually are effective in a majority of the time, in my experience. Now, where they are, when you get an offender that violates a restraining order, those are the most dangerous types. When we studied domestic violence homicides, one of the things that was always in the offender's background was violation of an order of protection.
Well, consistently. That's interesting.
Consistently. Why? Because that is just a piece of paper. That's not a deterrent. Cops aren't a deterrent to them. No one's a deterrent. They can
Right.
do whatever they want.
That's their personality.
Right.
So what's the profile of these type of abusers that go so far as to abuse and violate a court order? I mean, you got to be pretty bold to do that.
Oh, they all start out the same way. These guys, and it can be women as well, but they're the best daters, right? They take dating to a new level. They're going to knock it out of the park. The person that they're courting is going to think, wow, I've never met anybody like this. This is perfect. This is the most perfect relationship I've ever been in my life. And then once they kind of get you under their spells, so to speak, that's when they start chipping away little by little, at the emotional abuse, isolate you from friends and family, start really tearing you apart.
So they take it up to the line, really. 'Cause and the people you're dealing with, we're talking about some high-end professionals. They kind of know these things, and they just push it right below being illegal. Is that what they do?
I mean, there are some master manipulators out there. And right, exactly. I mean, to be honest with you, sometimes the worst abusers are former or current law enforcement, right? So they know exactly what the laws are.
That's a good point.
And they know how to go up to that point. So they're terrorizing their victims, yet the victims are in a position where, they don't know what to do because there haven't been any crimes committed. And a lot of times that's where the restraining order might come in, because it might be enough. Because for a restraining order, you don't have to prove those beyond reasonable doubt. It's just usually by a preponderance of the evidence, right? So it's a lot easier standard to get that.
So let's talk about the kind of textbook sociopath next door.
Which is a great book, by the way.
An actual book?
It's an actual book, The Sociopath Next Door.
Well, I should be a title writer. I didn't even realize that.
Yeah. I recommend you read it. It's great. And it's basically talking about the sociopath that looks like your neighbor, that looks like, just some guy you just pass on the street that's in a nice suit, nice looking guy, Who are these sociopaths? They are brilliant at disguising who they are, and they are able to capture, a variety of individuals, just because they're just so gifted at really reeling people in.
So give me a case of somebody you've helped, let's say at a professional level, that, had the same problems as somebody that doesn't have the money to do something about it. How did they act differently? It seems like the people that could do things about it tend not to. They tend to stay out of court. They tend to keep it out of the papers or keep it out of a public eye. And what do they do privately that they think is going to work that doesn't work? How do they handle it internally till it gets to a point of failure?
Unfortunately, what most of them do is they ignore it for too long. They ignore the behavior. Things happen over and over, and they're not reporting it to the police, not even to just make, an incident report. They're not really telling anyone. So that's the biggest mistake people are making, is just completely ignoring it. Secondly, I would think a lot of times, unfortunately, they don't feel comfortable and they don't trust anyone, so they're really afraid to, people are going to judge them. Oh my God, how did Susie get in a relationship with someone that's doing this to them?
You think
right?
there's more social pressure from their peer groups to not look bad? Is that one of the things that keeps it?
Yeah, I don't think anybody wants to admit it's a failure, right? When you break up, whether it's a divorce or you're just breaking up with someone, that the relationship is ending, it has failed. And a lot of people don't want to accept the failure of the relationship. A lot of times they still think that they can salvage part of it. It all depends on where are they are they in their thought processes. Now, for people that are being stalked, they've already left the relationship. They want a new life. They want to get on with their life, but their former partner is not allowing them to do that. They're putting them under surveillance. And a lot of times that's when we employ our stalk the stalker methods.
Do you have stalkers that happen while the divorce is going on, or do you think most of it happens post-divorce?
Definitely. Usually when they no longer have physical access to that person. So usually when the person's moved out of the residence, that's when the stalking.
Oh, so they may not be
happening.
divorced yet. It just may be that they're not physically in contact with them, so they want
Right.
to check up on them.
As soon as somebody moves out, that's generally when that stalking. Hey, where are they? I don't know now what time they're getting home.
Right.
That kind of thing.
So, Brian, how many minutes we got? 30 seconds. All right. So, I shouldn't do that. Sorry about that, folks. The magic spring on the old microphone. Well, I want to talk about a case you told me about that involved a couple of doctors. I think that was kind of interesting to show how people at all different levels still have the same basic problems, but different groups tend to handle them differently. And I think that's kind of interesting. So we will be back in a few minutes on Security Guy Radio, securityguy.radio.com. Brian? Am I on now, Brian? Thank you, Mr. Brian.
We switched microphones during the break, everybody. I'm so sorry.
Well, I think if you didn't have so many girls in your control booth, possibly, we'd have a better sound effects. Let me say that again. Welcome back to Security Guy Radio. That's securityguy.radio.com with Chuck Harold and Paul No-Show Bristow, because he's out sick today, and my guest, Pam Paziotopoulos, also known as Pam Paz of forestadvisors.com. Visit us on the web at securityguy.radio.com, at Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Well, I said that pretty well, didn't I? On my new microphone, where hopefully my voice does not fluctuate, Mr. Brian Engineer. Listen, if you get this wrong, my phone goes off with a dozen tweets and texts. Chuck, your voice, we can't hear you.
Everybody can address their concerns at Adrenaline Radio on Twitter and on our Facebook page, adrenalineradio.com.
I think it would be better to address it at securityguy.radio.com, but I digress. Anyway, welcome back, Pam.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're talking about forestadvisors.com and Pam, which is partnerandmentor.com, one of your programs that helps you leave, basically, and leave right without getting hurt. So we're going to talk about some cases that didn't go so well when people decided they wanted to handle this personally. They wanted to handle it privately because they felt, due to their work or their environment or their profession, they didn't want to jeopardize their work or their career. And we're going to get into domestic violence in the workplace, which we've done before, and we'll see how this is all tied in. But give us a couple of stories of things that didn't go so well when one or another partner decided, I think we're going to break it off and go from there.
Well, one story that really comes to mind because it was sort of a friend of a friend. Drop-dead, gorgeous woman. She's a physician. Gets engaged, lives on the East Coast to another really good-looking physician. Well, during the relationship, she noticed that he had become very abusive verbally. He was incredibly controlling, just checking up on her, making her check in with him at all times. Where are you going? Why were you late? This and that. So she tells her family that, she's going to break off the relationship. She's like, I'm sorry. I know we've got wedding plans. We're going to lose money on the deposit, this and that. But this guy's just...
How long did they date?
They were dating for about a year.
Okay.
And they were already engaged, had
Right.
a wedding date, the whole thing set, the dress picked out, the whole bit. And her family said, we want you to be happy. If you're not happy, then, go, that's fine with us. So she decides that, everybody told her, don't do this, with just the two of you, why don't you do it over the phone or she had a brother. The brother really wanted to go with her when she was going to tell him, hey, I'm going to break off the relationship.
So hold it right there for a second. Why do you think they said that?
Oh, because
intuition? What was the...
Oh, because she was crying to them for months about the fact that he was becoming so controlling.
Oh, okay.
And then she became really afraid of him, So, of course, her family, said, listen, this is not a healthy relationship. We want you to get out of this, but we want you to get out safely. So she argued with her family member. She said, no, I feel like I owe it to him, right? So she felt guilty about it. She's like, I owe it to him to go do this in person, just the two of us, privately.
Sounds reasonable.
In his apartment. It does, right?
Yeah.
So she went over there. Unfortunately, when she told him, hey, here's the ring back. We're just not right for each other. It's nothing against you. It's just me, and I need this and time and whatever. He went, opened up the closet door, pulled out his rifle, killed her, and then killed himself.
And these are two doctors?
Two doctors.
Wow.
Right? And unfortunately, this isn't that uncommon. You hear about these active shooter situations at a workplace, and it turns out it's the ex, right, looking for his partner.
Yeah, I think...
How about the case at Excalibur Casino?
What was the number on that? Active workplace shooters are, what was it, 40, 50% domestic related? It's a high number. I can't remember the exact number. It's a much higher number than you think. So
It
yeah,
is.
it's gonna boil into the workplace, and you have a much bigger chance of having a spouse abuse eruption at your work than you do at their house.
It happened at Excalibur Casino. I don't know if you remember that case. They were living in Chicago. She broke up with him, fled to Vegas, didn't think that he knew where she was, takes a job at the concierge desk right as soon as you walk into Excalibur, right there. Of course, he found out where she was at, walks right in, kills her, and then kills himself.
Yeah.
You know? Now, do you think she felt comfortable coming forward telling security, hey, now here's a place that's talk about cameras and security. How much more cameras security can you have than at a casino? But if they don't know who to protect, how can they protect against that?
Well, I think one reason people are reluctant to report this in the workplace is there's a lot of places don't have a program, and they think it's going to jeopardize their job by reporting it, when in fact, not reporting it is a bigger danger in a way.
Yeah.
It's a
and
tricky situation.
That's a good point, Chuck, because I think the most important thing is to create a culture at your workplace where people feel comfortable coming forward, that they're not going to be judged, that you're not going to say, wow, Chuck Harold, I thought he was like a totally together guy, but did you hear he's got some psycho ex that's been stalking him at work?
We should have
right?
used Paul Bristow's name instead of mine, for example, but it's okay. Okay, so tell me how these people in these two cases, what mistakes they made and what they would have done if they had a couple professionals talking to them and saying, hey, before you go and think you're okay moving to Vegas, let's look at A, B, and C. Start with the doctors. My first thing would be listen to your family, listen to your gut feelings. Gavin DeBecker has that great book, The Gift of Fear, which is really about your intuition, and you have to trust it. Would you agree?
Oh my God. I think I told you earlier, Chuck, I'm here visiting in Los Angeles, and I was at the Santa Monica Pier today, and we parked in the garage there, and I was pleasantly surprised to see a door that was painted red right there in the parking garage that said, listen to your gut.
Yeah.
So, right? I mean, telling people, we feel it, but our brain gets in the way.
Why did that doctor ignore it? She had the family telling her.
Because she felt guilty, Chuck.
Yeah,
She felt guilty. She was engaged to this person, right?
But she was afraid of him.
Yeah, but I think she also felt that she was going to inflict a lot of embarrassment and shame upon him for breaking off his engagement, right? Think about his friends, his colleagues, family.
Well, that's true.
What happened? Oh, she decided she didn't want to marry me, So she felt like she wanted to give him some dignity, give him a chance to, say whatever he was going to say, try to blame it on herself, that she needed time, that it was really her, not him. Despite the protests by her family, she went anyway. So of course we would.
What would you have told her differently?
I would have explained numerous situations like the Excalibur incident, and unfortunately, in my PowerPoint presentations and just in my files, I'll sit down with a victim and I will show them numerous cases of these homicides, suicides. Why you don't do this.
So here's something interesting that I'm gonna agree with you and disagree, because I don't have the same level of that as you do on your side of it, but at a studio we would advise our employees about things.
Sure.
Do you think you're making an intellectual appeal to an emotional issue? And does that work? I think you have to make an emotional appeal to an emotional issue. So if you cite stats with her that says, in 65% of the cases, this is what's going to happen, but she's emotional and committed to not embarrassing him and not doing that, I don't know she hears it, because certainly she heard her family tell her. And she was telling her family she was disturbed by it. So I don't know. It's a tough one. I think
It is a tough one, but I think if you really, if I sat down with her, trust me, all unhealthy relationships have that sort of cycle of violence, right? Where there's that tension building, something happens in the honeymoon stage. And if I sat down with her and I really analyzed, said, tell me everything about your relationship. How did it start? What were the red flags? And we really wrote them down on a piece of paper, and she could see that. And then she can kind of, I'll show them the power and control wheel and the cycle of violence and those things. And when they see it in black and white, wow, yeah, you know what? My relationship did kind of look like that. Those were the tactics. He did try to isolate me from my friends and family. He did try to, emotionally abuse me. He was stalking me, I guess it really was unhealthy. Sometimes, I know what you're saying, but sometimes I had a case, let me tell you about. This woman was a neurosurgeon, very prominent neurosurgeon. And she called me. I get random calls every week of, people I've never met before. So I meet this woman and we have a cup of coffee and she says, I think I'm in an unhealthy relationship, but I'm not sure. So I pull out this power and control wheel. I start with, does your abuser, isolate you from friends and family? Go through all those segments of the wheel. And she goes, oh my God, I don't even know you. This is exactly what's going on in my house.
Oh, okay.
So
Right.
it was really helpful for her to see that sort of in black and white.
And she did not identify that as a problem, that behavior.
No, before she was just kind of had the gut feeling like something's wrong. I'm not quite sure. But then when she saw it, she was like, yes, this is exactly how my husband acts.
Okay, so when does a client typically come to you? After they decide that they're going to leave, or they're going to use you in the process to decide to leave? Because this lady sounded like she used you to decide to leave.
She used me to decide to leave. She was, afraid of leaving because she wasn't quite sure she had a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old little boy. So she was, what's going to happen? What kind of visitation is he going to get? She was very concerned about the order of protection because he was a physician as well. So how would that affect his ability to work?
Remind me not to get my tonsils checked in Chicago or anything. Apparently there's a pandemic of doctor issues over there. So...
Let me tell you, it runs the gamut. I have had abusers that, you name the profession, everything from law enforcement to judges. It really, no one is exempt from being an abuser, and no one's exempt from being a victim as well.
So, Brian, what do you got? 30 seconds? What's that?
Oh, we'll go to break in 30 seconds.
30 seconds, all right. So when we come back, I want to hit on where people can start thinking. In other words, where and when do they start thinking about, I have a problem, and I want you to try and help them identify it as much as we can through the show. I think I'm learning a little bit about how we can put some things out there to make people think, wait a minute, that wheel you talked about, right? They don't have that with them.
Sure.
When we come back, let's talk about how we can put that out here on the radio today and say, ladies and gentlemen, listen up. You got a problem if, and let's go through it. All right, back in a minute on Security Guy Radio, securityguy.com. Welcome back to Security Guy Radio, securityguy.com. Did I say .com or .com? Oh, too much coffee. securityguy.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And I'm with my guest, Miss Pam Paziotopoulos, Pam Paz, as she's known, the crisis coach of forestadvisors.com. And we're talking about intimate partner violence and how to get out, how to leave. And before the break, we were talking about how to identify if it's time to leave, right? And we were talking during the break that I think you start out happy in a relationship. Very few people start out unhappy in a relationship. I suppose there's some people that do. But, for the most part, you want it to work and you start out happy.
Course.
And then it goes bad. And my suggestion is don't let it go too bad too long. And I think if you get out sooner, you're going to have less problems. Because my view is if you stay in too long, you're giving the other person really wrong information. If you're unhappy and you're staying, they think you're fine. And if you stay, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and then all of a sudden you leave, they're going to get mad about it because they think you ripped them off, so to speak. Give me some ideas on, like the top 10 list of how to identify when it's time to get out. What are some tips that people ignore?
You know what? What are your friends and family saying? Most of the time when people are in an unhealthy relationship, their friends and their family, they can tell.
They
right?
know. They do know.
You've been out. You see two people that you don't even know. They're sitting across from you at a restaurant, and you can tell whether they're in a good relationship or
true.
a bad relationship, right? Kind of have that look on their face.
No, listen, I got 9 sisters.
Oh,
right? So
there you go.
I've vetted many a boyfriend / husband / ex, whatever you want to call it. And my one sister in particular, when we were very young, dated this guy that we all thought was just the nicest, happy guy. And she didn't care for him. And she, went for somebody exactly the opposite. We all said, no, I don't think that's not like so-and-so. That was, that guy was a better choice. And I think those are valid because they're seeing, your family are seeing things from, 30,000 feet, and they're really not putting any prejudice into it. They're just saying, you know what, I got a gut about that, and I think you should go with that. I agree with you on that one.
Yeah, well, they can be objective,
That's right.
And when the more, as you said, the longer you stay, the longer you try to what? Justify it, right?
Okay, but here's something I think
You
is
want to
interesting.
justify it.
So, and you don't exclusively deal with high-end, or high-income people or successful people, but you do a
No,
lot
because
of them.
it is an outside consulting.
Yeah, they got
business.
to have some
Right.
money they got
They
to
have
pay.
Exactly.
But I think this. I think if I'm a doctor, lawyer, professional, person with a degree and big six-figure job, I'm kind of thinking I'm really competitive. I'm kind of thinking I don't like to fail, and I don't want to give up. And I almost look at those type of people as more, I don't know if dangerous is the right word, but more controlling, more.
As a victim or the offender, or
Well,
both? What do you
both.
think?
I mean,
Yeah,
both.
sure.
More willing to try to make it work when it really shouldn't work. And, you can't put common sense in a bottle because if you did, you'd be a billionaire, right? And a lot of times people that don't have all those options, which would be money, friends, whatever you want to call it, they just go to a practical level and say, you know what, I got to move on. And it's a simpler decision than when you have a multi-million-dollar house and
Well, and add children to the mix
children,
too, right?
and who's going to support the kids, and it's a big mess.
It is a big mess, and I think you're right. Though they are afraid of being judged as a failure.
Right, and I think that creates more animosity or something.
Listen, this issue is embarrassing for a lot of folks. Let me tell you about a case where I had a male victim. He about 6'5", really big guy, right? Athlete in college, the whole bit. Goes to law school, takes a job with a very, very large, prestigious firm. Now, his girlfriend in law school, also an attorney, is about 4'10", probably not 90 pounds, dripping wet, but a total psycho, right? And trying to break up with him, she'll have none of that. Stalking him, showing up everywhere. Anytime he's on a date, she'll find out who the woman is. She'll send the woman emails, call the woman, just complete nightmare.
A lot of country songs about that. Definitely.
So anyway, he goes to work at this very prestigious law firm, right? And his very first day, he's talking to the partner there that's giving him his assignments and all
His
of
first
that.
day at work?
First day at
Right.
work, right? Now, she's been threatening him, I'm going to ruin you, I'm going to destroy you, all this and that. Do you think he communicates that to anybody at work?
Of course not.
Of course
Well,
not.
he's embarrassed because he thinks it might jeopardize his job.
Right. So they get a bomb threat that day, and they're like, oh, my God, what's going on? So they evacuate the building. There she is walking by, right, with a cup of coffee.
Uh-oh.
Right? So eventually he fesses up, Now, what could that
Wait, he reported that to his firm that
he
she called the bomb
eventually
threat?
he saw her walking by, and so he knew, I bet she did it,
Right.
So then he felt a little, he's like, I got to tell somebody. So he found the security director, told security, and, they looked into it, and they did what they needed to do. Eventually, I think he did seek a restraining order against her.
Did he lose his job?
He didn't lose his job. No,
Oh, that's
he
good.
didn't. But the lesson here is, and I've gone into, several law firms and helped them create workplace violence programs. So if I started a firm on the first day, do you really think I want to report that to the partner, that I'm in an abusive relationship and I'm afraid my ex might come here? And
Well, of course not, but
of course not. But listen to this. If you have a threat assessment team and Chuck, the security guy at the firm, right, I can go directly to Chuck, and I'm told that on my first day. HR tells me that. Listen, just so you know, we have a workplace violence policy. If your former partner harasses, threatens you, we've created a culture here where we're open to receiving that information to keep you safe and everybody else safe. You don't have to go to your management. You can go directly to Chuck, the head of the threat assessment team, and he will keep it confidential.
and that doesn't jeopardize your job because by company policy, they're telling you it doesn't jeopardize your job.
Right, of
They want to know
course.
about it to protect everybody else.
Right. And to
Yeah.
be honest with you, the partner, what's a partner going to do with that information anyway? They're not former law enforcement. They don't know how to manage that. That basically a director of security is managing that threat.
So here's what I'd be afraid of. I sign my papers that say you're hired, and it says pending passing a background check. A background check could include you not disclosing that you had a restraining order against somebody. And I think you got to be careful about that.
Oh, sure.
Another reluctancy. But again, I always tell people side with caution. Really, you can get another job. You can't get another, life if you're killed or your family's killed or something like that.
Oh, of course.
So
of
give me
course.
some other tip-off signs. What else might you listen to? A little voice in your head that says, time to get out, and I better call Pam to figure out how to do that.
A great tactic that's very effective is isolating the victim from friends and family, right? Why do you need to call your mom all day long?
You mean this is what the abusers do?
Right,
Okay.
right. So, someone that's isolating you from friends and family, and all of a sudden you're thinking to yourself, wow, they really, I'm hesitant to go over to my mom's today. I'm hesitant to call my sister again or go out with my girlfriends because, he gives me such a hard time about that. So, isolating you from friends and family. I tell all our listeners out there today, get on the internet, Google Power and Control Wheel. Take a look at it. It's a really simple tool, but I'm here to tell you, Chuck, it's one of the most effective tools that you can use when you're sitting across the table from somebody that you think's in an unhealthy relationship.
I have a hard time getting my head around people not understanding they're in a bad relationship because I've seen it so much in my career as you have. I guess we're just, for lack of a better term, good at recognizing it or professional or something. That wheel that really helps people say, oh, I didn't understand this before. I get it now. It's not normal behavior. It's not healthy behavior.
And they need to see it. You need to see it in black and white, really. I can't tell you if I didn't have over 100 examples of people I'd sat down with that simple wheel that was developed in Duluth, Minnesota, I think in 1974, something like that. It's incredibly effective. People, they really do need to see something like that. They also, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were.
No. Only when I open my mouth and move is when. I'm just looking at my notes. All right.
I think we also need to be sympathetic to people. How many times did you ever stay in a job too long?
Yes, as a matter of fact. Yes. This one may be the one right here. I'm not really sure. No, I know what you're saying. No,
So we've all been in jobs for too long.
This is a good analogy,
course,
okay?
Right?
So I've had jobs that are the greatest jobs in the world, not the greatest jobs. And why do I stay? Well, because I, A, can't get another one, or B, I have an obligation to pay for my kid's school, or, there's all kinds of reasons you stay. And it's staying in a bad job is not a poor analogy to staying in a bad relationship. It's very similar. That makes a lot of sense.
And you're talking about factors, how do you feel? Somebody that you said you go from happy to unhappy, are you being you? Right? Do you feel like good about yourself? Are you at your best with this person? Or are you feeling like, wow, you know what? I'm just not me anymore. This voice comes out and you feel like, God, I don't even know who I am anymore.
Do you think that victims know or have a sense if their partner is going to go postal? In other words, we've all had our bad days, myself included. But I'm not sure that people that know me or friends or family would say that I'm going to go crazy and go postal. But is there something to that you could give as a tip that would indicate this has crossed the line as far as behavior goes? This is when you have to be concerned about acting out on that extreme verbal threat or extreme physical threat or something?
Sure. Well, what we know for sure is obviously stalking is a major indicator. Someone that's following you, major indicator of future violence.
Now, let's define following. I think when you say stalking, people think it's a guy sneaking around the corner, but it can be checking on your phone records. It could be checking on your friends. It could be following your friends on Facebook, or it could be a lot of things.
Really, Chuck, what it comes down to is an obsession. You took the word out of my mouth.
Yeah.
Really have become obsessed. Obviously, that's a high indicator. A recent acquisition of a firearm. Okay.
Well, that's
recent acquisition. The guy that's had the gun in the house for 20 years, not that he couldn't use it, but the recent acquisition, obviously, high indicator. Third, we talked about it before, violating the protective order. Okay, you go out, you get a restraining order, the person gets served with it. Hey, you got to stay away from this person. The next thing you know, they're calling, they're violating it, they don't care. That's a dangerous individual.
Yeah, but I'm talking about if you're inside the relationship and you haven't decided to leave. What are you looking for as the victim to say, you know what, that behavior right there means time to leave?
Well, obviously the control.
Those ones we just talked about.
Oh, and just someone that's super controlling, you don't experience free will anymore. You feel like, wow, someone's always looking over my shoulder, what time I leave the house, what time I come home. I've had victims tell me that, and several victims tell me that their husbands were checking the mileage on the car. Hey, you said you were just going to run to Walgreens, and that should have only been a mile. So the mileage here says you went 10 miles. Where'd you go?
What about a lack of control? Is that an indicator?
Someone, what? That's,
The guy withdraws. He decides no more control, not involved. Hold that thought. Do I hear the let's take a commercial break music, Mr. Brian? All right, we'll be back in a minute on Security Guy Radio. That's securityguyradio.com. Hi, everyone. This is Chuck Harold with my co-host,
Paul Tally-ho Bristow.
from Security Guy Radio. Regard is a verb, not a noun. Every Monday night at 7 p.m., we challenge the conventional wisdom of the security industry with our plain talk experience, humorous stories, and answers from the top security experts in the field. Tune in each week for the latest security news, enlightening interviews, and a look at a featured security gadget or service.
Join us on the web at securityguyradio.com.
And listen every Monday night at 7 p.m. exclusively on adrenalineradio.com. Welcome back to Security Guy Radio. That's securityguyradio.com. Your host, Chuck Harold, with Paul No-Show Bristow, because Mr. Bristow's out sick today. And my guest, Pam Paziotopoulos. Pam Paz, a crisis coach of forestadvisors.com, and her new program, PAM, what a clever acronym, which stands for Partner and Mentor.com. So, Pam, right before the break, we were talking about control of these signs. If the guy's checking on you or the girl's checking on you and wants GPS on your phone and wants to know where you are all the time and, constantly asking you verify your stories. But I indicated that there might be another factor to look for, which is lack of control or seeming control or lack of response or withdrawal. So I'm thinking about somebody that might be highly motivated to act out and control and make issues and then just kind of drops it all. It just stops. I think that's a chilling indicator you got to pay attention to. And that might be tied to what?
Well, what you're
or-
describing is, a downward spiral, right?
Right.
And in the courts, a lot of times we would pick up the arrest report and it would say the guy was an accountant, right? But you need to ask some questions. So what's going on at work? As a matter of fact, just got fired from his job, right? Or one of his parents died, right? Or maybe he had a pet that passed away that he was, had for the last 12 years, some kind of trigger there, that's now this person's in a downward spiral. And like you said, it may look as though they're sort of withdrawing from the relationship, but in essence, they're really, it's a call for help a lot of times, especially if they can be on some kind of suicide mission.
So can a sociopathic personality, though, really kind of fake that issue? In other words, yeah, he's downward spiral, and he says he wants to hurt himself, but really that's to make his spouse stay.
It could.
She wants to leave, and he's saying,
really
wait a minute.
Complicated sociopathic way. Sure,
Yeah.
they're master manipulators,
Right.
so they know that what you're getting at is guilt. Guilt is an effective tool. It really is. Think about it. When somebody feels guilty, they're willing to do almost anything, right?
Right.
To alleviate themselves of the guilt. That's what happened with that woman when she went to break up with him in person, because she felt, despite the fact that the guy wasn't a good guy, she felt bad about it, right? She felt guilty breaking off the relationship.
So there's never a good time to leave, and there's really never a bad time to leave. I look at the well, no, I mean, it sounds funny, but you can't say I'm going to wait and do it on this date and time, because there's always an intervening factor. But
there's usually what happens, and men can be victims
I don't
too.
say
But
when,
there's
but
usually some trigger. Something happens when somebody says, "You know what? That's it. I'm out of here."
yeah, but they don't do it. That's what I'm telling you. So the point is, they say I want to leave, and they don't, or they do it poorly. So let's talk about how.
Or they do it poorly, correct?
Right. So let's talk about how you would get them out systematically, safely, in a way that makes sense. Now, it's going to be hard to do this for a lot of people, but I want you to give it, your best advice and say, trust me on this. Here's how we do it. So I'm not going to play a female role. I'll play my male role. I'm a guy. I got to get out my My spouse comes home and hits me in the head with a rolling pin every night, and I just can't do it anymore. And I'm really physically afraid. What do I do? How do I start to
Well,
get
we
out of it?
call this, Chuck, safety planning, and there's lots on the internet about safety planning. So what's that about? That's about lowering your risk of being harmed. So how can we do that? Things like everybody, or not everybody, but most people have a neighbor, right? Maybe you live in a condo building, or even if you live in a house, the guy across the street or the woman next door
Or
to
the
you.
doorman in a high rise or something.
Yeah, somebody that you trust, that you feel would be loyal to you. And you say, listen, I'm having some problems. This is a code word, take the dog out. It's some kind of code word with this person, right? So
That you would tell them if you were
right.
having a problem.
Right, exactly. And they could and you say, hey, if I say this to you, just go ahead and call 911. Or, for example, a lot of times, you feel the tension building, right? You think something's going to happen. Get out, take out the trash, and don't come back.
Oh, that's a good
Take
point.
the dog for a walk.
Don't announce you're leaving.
Don't announce
Never
you're
announce
leaving.
you're leaving, correct?
Never.
Never. Under no
You know what?
circumstances.
You take the trash out. You don't have your purse with. You've got nothing on you. Maybe you've got something in your pocket. Whatever you need to do to get to wherever you're going to go. After you take the trash out, you take the dog for a walk and you just keep walking. You call a friend. You do whatever you need to do. But you never want to sound the alarms, Chuck.
Never.
Never.
Never threaten it either. I don't
Never
think.
threaten it. And that's why a lot of people have code words that their kids know too, that say, hey, you hear mommy say this, that means run, get in the car, or run and go across the street to the neighbors, so code words.
And by the way, we're not really talking necessarily about imminent danger.
No.
All right, so I don't want people to confuse the fact that you're getting, hit with a baseball bat and the code word is, I'm going to take the dog for a walk. This could be, I've had it to avoid physical harm, which may come, which hasn't come.
So many.
I want to get out now before I get hit.
Of course.
Sometimes, right.
Sometimes, we've had people say, hey, you get up in the morning, you want to leave someone that's being abusive. Get up, you make them a great breakfast, give them a kiss, make future plans. What are we going to do this weekend? Hey, I was looking at this Apple vacation thing, for 2 months from now. What do you think about that? So they're thinking that you're still with them, right? You know, they leave, you pack up your stuff, you get out of there, you never come back. And if you do need to come back, you know how you do that? You get a police escort.
Yeah, the police will keep the
And
peace.
they will do that.
They'll do it. Yep. It's
They
called
will.
keep the peace.
Yeah, exactly. So they'll come back with you and you can get the rest of your things,
So do you advise, here's the problem with leaving. A lot of people will tend to go to a place familiar, and that's the sister's house or the friends, and, the spouse knows all that stuff. I always advise, get to some hotel, not in the area, stay there for a while until you can get a plan.
Right.
But never, ever tell anybody where you are. Don't even tell your mom. I had a case once where a woman stole her child against a court order. And the reason I found her is because I found out who her mother was calling 20 times a day. And her mother was calling a particular hotel. She lived in San Francisco, the mother. And she was calling a hotel in Santa Monica 25 times a day. And I knew that was where her daughter was.
Right.
Who else would you call 25 times a day?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, there's a woman by the name of a victim, Cindy Bischoff, who lost her life. And Cindy was doing everything. She was staying at hotels. She was staying at a friend's place, lake houses, this and that. One address you can't change, where you work.
Your work, yep.
And unfortunately, he waited for her. And as soon as she came out of a real estate office, he killed her and then killed himself.
Well, that's another thing. I think you have to make pre-arrangements with your work. Maybe the day ahead of time that says, I'm going to be taking 2 weeks vacation, because you don't want to jeopardize your work. You don't want to transfer. And then you decide that next day that you're leaving, and that way you're not going back to work. Because, again, I think it's 40% of the shootings in workplaces are domestic violence related.
And there's plenty of laws to protect you, to give you that time that you need off to leave the abusive relationship.
That's right, in most states now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not just
So
California.
you need to just take those steps to make sure you're safe.
Any other tips? What else can we do?
Basically just educate yourself as much as possible. Thankfully, there's a lot on the internet, as far as safety planning, making sure you know what the risk factors on. And, I would say that unfortunately you really need to get over the guilt, because so many victims that I consult with, they just feel guilty. They feel guilty for breaking up their families. They're afraid of the effects on the children, if they leave their abuser.
Well, let's talk about the effects on the children. In your experience, in the long run, aren't they better not to be around the abuse? I mean, I was looking at a stat here. Let's see what this says. It was 3.2 million kids witness domestic violence every year. That's a lot of kids.
You know what? And let's talk about kids. This is my experience.
87% of the children in these families witness this, and they become abusers. By the way,
But
that's
the apple
cycle.
doesn't fall far, right?
That's the cycle.
Well, in my experience, the young kids obviously become afraid of the abuser, right? And they're hiding underneath the table. They're just trying to get to a safe place.
Trying to survive.
Trying to survive, right? What do you think happens when they grow up and get to be teenagers? Then what happens? Then they start interfering.
Are you interviewing me? Because I don't have an answer.
No.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm saying they start interfering and they start to try to protect mom. And there was actually an interesting study where they found that a majority of juvenile offenders, what do you think that they were in there for?
A battery on their...
Mom's boyfriend.
Oh, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I could see that.
So then they start interfering, right?
Right.
Interfering, right? And then there's all sorts of charges,
Well,
right?
they step
So
in
you've
as the
got-
role of the dad and the protector.
Right.
Yeah.
So then you've got the teenage son being charged with a crime. You have the abuser being charged with a crime. I mean, as you can see, it affects a variety of issues for the family.
What I can see people resisting taking children because they're going to be accused of child stealing and a legal issue. You know what I say? Forget all that stuff. I'm not a lawyer. I'm advising you on safety. I'm advising you get to a place of safety for a couple weeks. A couple weeks isn't that much time. It's all going to fade out, and then you make a decision when you're in a nice, calm, non-emotional state and a safe state, right?
Yeah, and somebody that can advise you, that can advise you to get to a safe place, make a safety plan for yourself, make sure you're being protected at work as well. And when you have, like you said, all those things in place, chances are you're going to be just fine.
Thus the name forestadvisors.com and
Yes.
partnerandmentor.com. Email address, people can send you an email.
Pam Paz at forestadvisors.com.
All right. And you take cases all around the country.
Take cases all around the country.
All right, excellent.
And you know what, Chuck? Life is just too short to stay in an unhealthy relationship. Everybody deserves to be happy.
I agree. Well, thanks for listening again. We'll be back next week on Security Guy Radio. That's securityguyradio.com. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. See you next week.